After my husband Daniel passed away, I thought the worst was behind me. But what followed was worse than widowhood. His family people I had cooked for, cleaned for, and cared for during holidays and hospital stays reduced me to a servant. They acted as though I was an outsider, a burden, even assigning me chores. At Daniel's own memorial, whispering behind my back that I had no place in their home, all while I stood there in silence, grieving the man I gave my life to. But that was the moment I awakened. My name is Eleanor Maddox from Asheville, North Carolina, and they had no idea that Daniel left everything to me. I've always believed that funerals were supposed to honor the dead, but Daniel's funeral felt more like a performance, a carefully staged play in which I was cast as the unwanted extra. I stood there in my black dress, stiff with starch and sorrow, watching people I had fed and clothed for decades look right through me as if I were invisible. I was his wife. I was the one who held his hand through cancer treatments, the one who slept upright in an ICU chair night after night. But somehow, after he died, I became the help. They didn't even let me sit in the front row. That seat was taken by Clarice, Daniel's sister. She walked in with her chest puffed up and her lips tight, as if she were the widow. I opened my mouth to protest, but she waved a hand, like I was a pesky breeze, and hissed, "Let it go, Eleanor. This day isn't about you." I felt the heat rise in my face, but I swallowed it. I didn't want to make a scene. Not yet. Instead, I found a seat near the back, tucked between two of Daniel's former co-workers, who didn't even know my name. One of them whispered, "I thought he wasn't married." The other shrugged. The whole service was orchestrated without me. The flowers were all Clarice's choosing, cheap-looking carnations, not the peonies Daniel always said reminded him of our wedding day. The music was some country gospel dirge that Daniel never liked. No one asked me for input. No one cared. I just sat there, a statue of a woman who had lost everything and didn't know where to place her grief. After the final prayer, while others embraced and wept, I was asked to gather empty cups and throw away used napkins. "You know where the kitchen things are," Clarice muttered, thrusting a trash bag into my hand. "We've got guests." I blinked at her, stunned. She didn't even look me in the eye, and I did it. I picked up crumbs off the table, wiped fingerprints from glassware, and took out the trash like some hired help. Not a single person offered to assist me. Not Daniel's children, not his nieces or nephews, not one of the friends whose vacations I had once organized, or whose emergencies I'd once answered with a checkbook and open arms. As I carried a tray of empty punch cups to the sink, I overheard Clarice whispering to Daniel's daughter Melissa, "She's just clinging on to what's not hers." Clarice said, her voice sharp as vinegar, "We'll get everything sorted once the lawyer reads the will. I'll make sure she's out of here soon." I stood frozen, the cups trembling in my hands. Out of here? Out of where? Our home. That's what she meant. The home Daniel and I had built together over 34 years of marriage. The home where I had repainted the walls every spring and refinished the floors myself to save us money. The home where I had once rocked Melissa's children to sleep so she could finish nursing school. The home where Daniel and I had made love, fought, reconciled, and lived through hell and high water. And now, with one whispered sentence, I was being erased from it. I think something inside me died more permanently that day than Daniel had. I didn't cry in front of them. I smiled when they gave me fake condolences and patted me on the arm like I was a frail old woman with nothing left. I even served pie. But that night, when the guests were gone and the lights were off, I stood alone in the kitchen, where I had once made Sunday pancakes for Daniel, and I let the tears come hot, angry, silent. I gripped the counter to keep from falling. My knuckles turned white. My whole body trembled with a rage I had never allowed myself to feel. They thought I was weak. They thought I was replaceable. They thought I was just the woman who washed the sheets and made the coffee and kept quiet when things got hard. And for a long time, I had been. I had accepted their dismissiveness, their backhanded comments, their little humiliations. Because Daniel was alive and loving him, made it bearable. But now he was gone, and there was no one left to justify their cruelty. And I had no intention of living the rest of my life scraping plates and cleaning up their messes. Something shifted inside me that night. Something deep. Something feral. I felt it in my bones, like a long dormant lion, waking after years in a cage. I thought about the folder hidden in Daniel's locked drawer, the one I had never opened because he had told me not to worry about the estate stuff. The one I now planned to read the moment I could get my hands on the key. Because what they didn't know, what none of them could imagine, is that Daniel had loved me enough to tell me the truth before he died. He had whispered it weak and rasping just hours before the end. I fixed it. You're taken care of. Don't let them take anything from you. And now, I wouldn't. I didn't expect kindness. Not after the way they looked at me during the funeral. But I never imagined they'd turn my grief into something so cold, so calculated, that it would make mourning my husband feel like a crime. The morning after the service, I woke to the sound of clinking china and voices in the kitchen. It was still early, the sun barely pushing through the curtains. I had barely slept. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Daniel's face in that casket, looking too still, too pale, like a porcelain mask of the man I loved. I slipped out of bed and padded down the hallway in my robe. The closer I got, the more I heard laughter. Loud, careless laughter. My steps slowed. She's still here. Melissa's voice, sharp and casual, as if I were an unwanted guest who'd overstayed a party. She'll go soon enough, Clarice replied. We just have to make her uncomfortable enough. Trust me, she's too proud to stay where she's not wanted. They were drinking my coffee, eating food I'd bought, sitting in a kitchen I'd scrubbed for decades, and plotting how to make me leave the house Daniel and I built together. My hand gripped the wall. I wanted to burst in to scream, to shove the mugs off the table and remind them whose name was on the deed. But I didn't, not yet, because I hadn't opened Daniel's documents. I hadn't confirmed what I suspected. So instead, I walked in with a soft, "Good morning," and they looked at me like I was dirt on the floor. "Oh, Eleanor," Melissa said, with mock concern. "We were just talking about how it might be best for everyone if you took a little time away. Maybe go visit your sister." I don't have a sister. I think staying here, where everything reminds you of him, is only going to make it harder to heal, Clarice added, folding her napkin like she was on a cruise ship, not in my kitchen. I swallowed the acid rising in my throat. "Well, this is my home," I said quietly. Melissa looked at me, eyes narrow. It was Daniel's home. That was the first time I felt the burn. Not of sadness, but of betrayal, turning into something sharper, something more powerful. I nodded slowly, not because I agreed, but because I wanted them to keep showing me who they really were. Later that day, I went to the hallway closet, the one Daniel kept locked with a simple brass key. I knew where he hid it. He thought he was clever, but I always knew. Behind the broken tile under the sink. The moment I found it, my hands trembled. I opened the closet. Inside were documents in neatly labeled folders. Property deeds, bank statements, stocks, bonds, and then the will. folded and placed inside a sealed envelope with my name on it. I didn't open it. Not yet. I sat down on the floor and let the weight of it settle on me. All those years, I was told I wasn't smart enough to handle the finances, that I didn't need to worry about the estate, that Clarice would take care of all that. I believed them. I trusted them. And now they were acting like I was some aging housemaid who'd overstayed her welcome. By noon, Melissa's 2 teenage daughters were barking orders at me like I was a waitress. "Can you get more towels?" one called from the hallway. "There's no shampoo in the guest bath," said the other. I told them to ask their mother. Melissa overheard and rolled her eyes. "We're just trying to keep things running, Eleanor. Maybe pitch in a little." Pitch in. As if I hadn't spent every waking hour these past years nursing Daniel, cooking meals, folding their clothes, driving them to the ER, watching their children while they vacationed. Pitch in. I retreated to my bedroom, closed the door, and cried. Not because I was sad, because I was angry, deep soul-shaking angry. But more than that, I felt the stirrings of something stronger than tears. Resolve. I sat at my old vanity and looked at myself. Really looked. My hair had more gray than I remembered. My eyes looked tired, yes, but they were still sharp, and behind them was a woman they had forgotten existed. They had mistaken my silence for weakness, my patience for stupidity. But I was Eleanor Maddox. I ran 2 nonprofits before I gave it all up for Daniel. I balanced checkbooks when we were broke maid, Thanksgiving dinners from scraps when his business failed, and smiled through family insults for the sake of peace. But I wasn't going to do it anymore. That evening, Clarice had the audacity to say, "We'll probably need to put the house on the market before the end of the month. Melissa says the market's hot right now." She said it while I was doing dishes. The plate in my hand slipped cracked clean down the middle. I looked at it, then at her. "You'll want to check the deed," I said softly, "before you start packing my things." She blinked, caught off guard. "What?" I said. I repeated more firmly, "You should check the deed." Clarice waved her hand. "Daniel didn't change anything. He left it all to his children. I've already called a realtor." I smiled. Not a warm smile. A knowing one. Because Daniel did change something. I hadn't opened the will yet, but I knew. I knew it in my bones, in the way he held my hand those final days. The way he told me, "Don't let them steal what you've earned." They didn't know what I knew, but soon they would. They act like I'm just the widow, the afterthought. But what they don't know, what they never cared to understand, is that everything they touch, everything they're trying to snatch, was paid for by the pieces of my life I gave up one by one. I wasn't always just Daniel's wife. Before him, I was Eleanor Turner, first in my class at UNC Chapel Hill, offered a research fellowship I turned down so I could move with Daniel to Atlanta when he got a job. He cried when I gave up that opportunity. I told him not to worry, I could always go back to academia later. But later never came. Instead, I worked temp jobs to pay our rent, while he chased his dream of opening his own hardware business. I believed in him. When the first 2 locations failed, I stayed. When we sold my engagement ring to make payroll, I smiled. It's just a thing I told him. We'll get another one someday. That someday never came either. I gave up motherhood too. Not by choice. We tried for years, spent everything we had on treatments. I'll never forget the day the doctor told us it wasn't going to happen naturally. Daniel couldn't bear the idea of adoption, said it wouldn't feel the same. So I let that dream die too, quietly, alone. And when Melissa, Daniel's daughter from a previous relationship, came to live with us at age 13, I poured every drop of that maternal love into her. I helped with her homework. I braided her hair. I stayed up nights when she had anxiety attacks. She called me Mom for a while, even made me a Mother's Day card when she was 16. But by the time she got married, I was Eleanor again. Not family, not mother. Just the woman who helped out. I remember scrubbing stains out of her wedding dress the night before the ceremony because the cleaner messed it up. She didn't even say thank you. She just assumed I would handle it. That's what I became to them, someone who handled things. When Daniel's sister Clarice lost her job, we took her in. I gave up the guest room I used for sewing and set her up with new bedding. For 4 months, she ate my food, used our laundry, and complained about how I folded her towels. When she left, she didn't offer a dime or a thank you. Daniel always said, "That's just Clarice." And because I loved him, I swallowed my pride and went on folding her towels. When Daniel got sick, really sick, I didn't ask for help. Not from the kids, not from his relatives. I bathed him, fed him, cleaned up after him when he was too weak to walk. I changed his catheter. I sat through every appointment, took notes, asked questions. I stopped seeing my friends. I put my entire life on hold because that's what love does. It stays. So, when I stood there listening to Melissa whisper with Clarice about how the house probably needs a deep clean and we'll need to go through her things soon, I thought, you mean my things, my closet, my memories, my life. But I said nothing, not yet. I went back to Daniel's closet and ran my fingers along his coats. Some still smelled like him, faint traces of cologne and motor oil. That man was a dreamer. He made mistakes. God knows he wasn't perfect, but he loved me deeply. And if there was one thing Daniel was good at, it was making things right eventually. The night before he died, he asked me to forgive him for what I asked, holding his cold hand between mine, for letting them get away with it, for not protecting you sooner, he whispered. But I made sure, this time. Those words echoed now as I stood alone in our room, while Clarice laughed downstairs with a bottle of wine she didn't buy and a plan she didn't earn. I remembered when we bought this house. We couldn't afford movers, so I hauled boxes up 3 flights of stairs until my knees gave out. I remember baking casseroles during snowstorms because we couldn't afford takeout. I remember pinching pennies for months just so we could buy new siding when the roof began to rot. I did that. Me. Every inch of this house holds a fingerprint of mine paint on the stair rail tile in the bathroom curtains I sewed by hand. And now they wanted to toss me aside, like I was some placeholder for their inheritance. As I sorted through more of Daniel's papers, I found something unexpected. Old letters, handwritten ones, addressed to me. Eleanor, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and I need you to know something. There were several. I couldn't finish them all in one sitting. My eyes were too blurred, but in every one, Daniel said the same thing in different ways. You gave me everything. I see it now. I'm sorry I let them treat you like less. I've made sure they can't take anything more from you. You are the rightful heir, not just to the house, but to the life we built. And I want them to know it. They will. They think I'm weak because I don't scream. They think I'm foolish because I don't fight in public. But I fought in silence all my life. And this time, I won't be silent much longer. It started subtly at first. Melissa began referring to the house as Dad's place. Not ours, not mine, just his, as though I had merely occupied space in it, like a guest who'd overstayed her welcome. Clarice would nod in agreement and talk about the estate like it was a prize waiting to be claimed. They weren't even mourning anymore. They were circling like vultures. But the real shift came that Thursday morning. I was in the kitchen, still in my robe, pouring coffee into my favorite chipped mug, the one Daniel got me on our 5th anniversary. It had a tiny heart near the handle, and he used to joke it was as sturdy as our love. I held it gently as if gripping that memory could hold my grief in place. Then I heard it. "She can't keep sleeping in the master," Melissa whispered, just loud enough for me to hear from the hallway. "She'll have to move to the guest room if she's staying another week," Clarice added. "That room's going to be needed once we decide what to do with the house." My heart stopped. I stood frozen at the kitchen counter, staring at the steam rising from the cup, trying to process what I'd just heard. Move out of the master bedroom, the bed Daniel and I shared for over 30 years, the space where I held him through sleepless nights and nursed him during his last days, the room where I whispered goodbye to his body. I didn't confront them right away. I just returned to my room, our room, and sat on the edge of the bed, gripping the mug with both hands. My stomach twisted with a feeling that was no longer just grief. It was something darker, heavier, something simmering. They wanted me out, completely, emotionally, physically. Melissa knocked on the door an hour later, with a soft smile that didn't touch her eyes. "Hey," she said gently, like I was a stray cat she was trying to coax off the porch. "We were thinking it might be more comfortable for you in the guest room. You know, just for now, until things settle." I looked at her, right at her, and for a moment, I almost said yes. Almost gave in, like I always had, because making others comfortable had become second nature to me. But not this time. "No," I said quietly. "I'm fine where I am." Melissa's smile faltered. "It's just, Dad's not here anymore, and we're trying to make the house more usable." For whom I asked, raising an eyebrow. She hesitated. "Well, the family. I am the family," I said, sharper now. "Or did you forget that I was the one who married your father, paid the bills when he couldn't, and stayed by his side when you stopped calling?" Her lips tightened. "That's not fair." "No," I said, standing up. "What's not fair is watching my husband's daughter act like I'm some squatter in my own home." Melissa turned and walked away, saying nothing. That night, I found my boxes stacked in the hallway. Boxes I didn't pack, my clothes folded clumsily, shoved into bins, my books, even a few framed photos of Daniel and me, as if they couldn't wait to erase the evidence of our life together. They had physically begun moving me out. I stared at the pile for a long time. Part of me wanted to scream, to throw something, to demand they stop. But I didn't. Instead, I carried the boxes one by one, not to the guest room, but back into the master. I placed every item exactly where it belonged. My sweaters in the drawer he built, my books on the shelf we assembled together, my photos on the nightstand. Then I locked the door. I hadn't used that lock in years. But that night I did. I slid the bolt across and slept with it secure. My rest was shallow but resolute. The next morning I called my lawyer. "Is it time?" I asked him. He paused, then said, "It's time." I had Daniel's will now. I had the deed. I had everything in writing. The home was mine. The stocks, the vacation property they didn't even know existed. Every last cent he had, he left to me. Not to Melissa, not to Clarice, to me. But I wasn't going to tell them. Not yet. I wanted them to dig the hole deeper, to see just how little they thought of me. I needed to see it fully before I delivered what they never expected, the truth. Over the next few days, the house grew colder. Melissa no longer made small talk. Clarice barely acknowledged me. The teenagers, the same ones I had baked cookies for just a week ago, laughed when I asked them to turn down the TV at midnight. They thought they were winning, but what they didn't realize is that I had already won, because this house wasn't just brick and wood to me. It was sacred. It was where I gave everything, and it was mine. The only thing left now was to make sure they knew it too. It was a Sunday afternoon when the final insult came, served with potato salad and plastic forks. Clarice decided to host a small family gathering at the house, without asking me. No calls, no courtesy, just people showing up in my driveway with store-bought pies and loud, familiar laughter that didn't belong here anymore. I was still in my gardening clothes, dirt on my gloves' knees, sore from planting new lilies beside the back fence, when I heard the doorbell ring, followed by voices flooding in. I walked in from the patio and saw them: Clarice's cousins, her church friends, Melissa's in-laws, and a few people I didn't even recognize, all chatting comfortably like they lived here. Like I didn't. They had set up folding tables in the living room, red and white checkered tablecloths draped over them, disposable everything. My antique china, handed down from my mother, left untouched in the cabinets, while they used flimsy paper plates on the marble dining table Daniel and I worked 2 jobs to afford. I stood in the doorway, jaw clenched. "Oh, Eleanor Clarice," called out from across the room, as if spotting an old neighbor, not the homeowner. "You're just in time to help set out the drinks." "Help." I looked at her. Really looked. She had no shame. She wore one of Daniel's old flannel shirts, claiming it smelled like family, while she poured sweet tea into plastic cups, like a queen hosting peasants. Melissa stood nearby, laughing with her friends, tossing chips into bowls, like she was at a tailgate. They were using my home like it was their vacation rental, their playground. I walked to the kitchen, but not to help. I needed to breathe. My hands gripped the sink edge. As I stared out the window, the lilies I had planted, Daniel's favorite, swayed in the breeze. And I remembered him, the way he used to protect me when his family got too loud, too selfish. He'd wrap his arm around my shoulder and whisper, "They don't know how much you hold this all together." But now he was gone, and they had forgotten. Or maybe they never cared to remember. A voice behind me jolted me from my thoughts. "You done sulking yet?" It was Clarice. I turned slowly. "You're being awfully quiet today," she said, sipping from her red cup. "People are starting to wonder if you're okay." "I'm fine," I said flatly. She raised an eyebrow. "Well, if you're feeling up to it, we could use some help wiping down the tables after dessert. And Melissa was wondering if you wouldn't mind sleeping in the guest room tonight. Her friend Trina's staying over. Just one night." That was the moment, the precise second the power shifted, because something in me snapped, and not in a loud, dramatic way. No, it was quieter, deadlier, a rising calm that settled into my bones like steel. I stared at her for a long time, so long she began to shift uncomfortably. "No," I said simply. Clarice blinked. "What?" I said no. Her expression twisted. "Don't be difficult, Eleanor. Everyone's just trying to get along." "No," I repeated, stepping closer. "You're not trying to get along. You're trying to erase me." The room had gone quieter. A few people nearby were pretending not to listen. "You're trying to rewrite this house," I said, my voice low but unwavering. "Repaint the memories. Redefine who Daniel loved. But let me remind you, he didn't ask you to be here. He asked me to stay." Clarice opened her mouth to protest, but I cut her off. "Go ask the lawyer, or better yet, wait. I'll show you myself, very soon." And then I walked out past the folding tables, the paper plates, the confused stares, and I locked myself in Daniel's study. Inside, I sat at his desk and opened the second folder. There, it was the official copy of the will, signed, notarized, recent. "To my wife, Eleanor Maddox, I leave all assets, properties, investments, and holdings with no stipulations. She is to remain in full ownership of the primary residence and vacation properties. No other party shall have claim. Everything was mine." I pressed the paper to my chest. My heart was beating hard, but not from fear, from relief, from vindication. I pulled out my phone and took pictures of every page. I emailed a copy to myself. I called Mr. Delaney, our attorney, and confirmed again that it was valid, uncontested, and ironclad. Then I began planning. They thought this was their victory party, but it was their wake, because paper plates may be easy to toss, but deeds, wills, and signatures, those are permanent. And the woman they treated like a maid. She owns the table they're eating off of. They were still cleaning up the party mess when I made the call. I could hear Melissa in the living room complaining about the trash bags and how Eleanor could at least help since she lives here for free. Clarice chuckled in agreement, dragging a garbage can across the floor I polished by hand last month. They didn't know I was listening how often I listened. My silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy. So I stepped out onto the back porch phone, in hand, and dialed Mr. Delaney. Eleanor, he answered warmly. I was expecting your call. I want to go ahead with the reading, I said. Here, in the house, with all of them present. There was a short pause. Are you sure? I looked through the sliding glass door at Melissa's husband, lounging in Daniel's old recliner, feet up like he owned the place. I've never been more sure. We scheduled it for the following Tuesday at 10 a.m. I made coffee that morning. Not for them, no, I made it for me. A quiet ritual, a small reclaiming of something ordinary that no longer felt ordinary at all. I didn't tell them what was coming. I just said, the lawyer will be here in the morning. He needs to review some documents regarding Daniel's estate. Melissa rolled her eyes. Great. Let's hope he moves faster than the last one. It's been weeks. Clarice chimed in. Finally, we'll get clarity on who gets what. I smiled into my coffee. Mr. Delaney arrived right on time. He was tall, neatly dressed, and carried a leather briefcase I recognized from years of estate meetings. He had known Daniel and me both for decades. When he entered the living room and saw everyone gathered, he nodded. Good morning. Thank you for being here. As per Daniel Maddox's final wishes, I'm here to read the updated will and distribute copies to involved parties. Melissa leaned forward, practically vibrating. Finally, Clarice crossed her arms, eyebrows raised in silent triumph. We assumed Daniel's children would be the primary beneficiaries, of course. Mr. Delaney didn't flinch. He placed the folder on the coffee table. This version was signed and notarized 6 months before Mr. Maddox passed. I personally oversaw the update. He cleared his throat and began reading. I, Daniel Joseph Maddox, being of sound mind and memory, hereby revoke all previous wills and codicils made by me. Clarice stopped smiling. And leave all my possessions, assets, properties, financial holdings, stocks, in the deed of our family home, located at 112 Camellia Drive, as well as our 2 vacation properties, to my beloved wife, Eleanor Maddox, in full ownership, with no division or distribution to any other party. Silence, thick, heavy, beautiful. Mr. Delaney continued reading, but they weren't listening anymore. Clarice's mouth hung open. Melissa blinked slowly, as if her ears had betrayed her. Her husband's hand slowly slipped off the arm of the recliner, like a dropped curtain at a failed performance. You're kidding, Clarice finally whispered. Mr. Delaney didn't look up. It is signed, witnessed, and legally binding. But what about us? Melissa stammered. I'm his daughter. Daniel left personal letters to you, and your brother Mr. Delaney said, pulling 2 envelopes from his folder and placing them gently on the table. But no financial inheritance. He made his decisions very clearly. Clarice turned to me. You knew, she hissed. You let us walk around this house treating you the way we did. I let you show me who you really are, I said calmly. Melissa stood. This is manipulation. This isn't what he meant. Oh, but it is, I said, rising to my feet. He told me before he passed. He said, I fixed it. I made it right. And now, I've made it known. Mr. Delaney offered me a small nod. Eleanor, I'll leave copies of the will here for your records. Everything is finalized. If you need assistance with the deed transfers or removing unauthorized occupants. Melissa's eyes went wide. You wouldn't. I looked her dead in the eye. You stacked boxes outside my room. You tried to put your friend in my bed. You served sweet tea in my kitchen and talked about selling this house like I was already gone. You don't get to be outraged now that the truth is here. Clarice was pacing. This is insane. He wouldn't cut us out like this. He didn't cut you out, I said, voice cool. He protected what mattered to him. Finally. For once I didn't cry. Not out of grief, not out of anger. I felt clear, like stepping into sunlight after months of cold shadow. The rest of that day passed in a daze for them. For me, it was a slow bloom of justice. Clarice stormed out by noon. Melissa retreated to her room and slammed the door like a teenager. I sat in Daniel's chair that night, my chair now, and ran my fingers over the fabric. Everything I had endured, every humiliation, every erased contribution. It was all written over permanently with a single signature that said, Eleanor mattered. They thought the lawyer's visit would be the start of their new life. They had no idea it was the beginning of mine. After the lawyer left, the silence in the house didn't feel victorious. It felt surgical, cold, precise, like something vital had been removed from them, and they didn't know how to live without it. I could have told them to leave that night. I had every right, legally, morally, emotionally, but I didn't. Not yet, because I needed one more moment, one final confirmation of who they were, stripped of pretense, stripped of excuses, one last humiliation to see if they would ever show remorse or only deeper entitlement. And sure enough, it came faster than I expected. The next morning, Melissa knocked on my bedroom door. Not politely, not gently. It was the knock of someone who believed they still had power. Eleanor, she called, we need to talk. I opened the door, keeping my expression unreadable. She stood there, arms folded tight across her chest, a forced calm over her face, like cellophane barely containing rage. We've been thinking, she began, about everything. The will, Dad's decisions, and we're willing to compromise. I didn't speak. I just tilted my head slightly. Let her dig. You can stay here, of course, she said, smiling, like she was offering mercy from a throne. No one wants to throw you out, Eleanor. I nearly laughed. Throw me out, the woman who owns the deed. But she continued, this place is too big for just you. And we're a family, so we'd like to make it work together. Like a cohabitation agreement. There it was, her pitch, her desperation dressed up like generosity. I'll pay some utilities. You keep the house. We all live together, she said, as if she were the one making allowances. And eventually, when it makes sense, maybe we can all agree on selling it and splitting the proceeds. A peaceful solution. I stared at her. She thought I was stupid. She thought I was still the maid in this story. The one who should be grateful for crumbs and compromise even after everything. I didn't answer her. Not right away. Instead, I let that moment stretch into silence. Her smile faltered. Eleanor, I appreciate your offer, I said finally. But no. Her nostrils flared. You're really going to be this spiteful? No, I replied. I'm going to be fair. I'm going to give you 3 days to gather your things and leave. She blinked like she hadn't heard me right. You can't be serious. I gave you time, I said calmly. I let you sleep in my home, eat my food, insult me under my roof. I watched you treat me like furniture. I let you test how far your disrespect would go. But now it ends. She was shaking her head already, forming objections. Don't do this, she said. Think about Dad. Think about what he would want. I am, I said, for the first time in a long time. She stormed off, and I let her go. That night, Clarice returned, furious. You can't just throw us out like dogs, she snapped, slamming her purse on the table. I can, I said. And I will. But I'm giving you grace I never got. Clarice laughed bitterly. You think this makes you strong? You think you've won? No, I said. I think I finally stopped losing. They didn't leave right away. They spent the next 2 days trying to turn the house against me, turning off my laundry, mid-cycle, blasting the TV at midnight, slamming doors. It was all so petty, so small, but I didn't rise to it, because I knew I had already won the real battle, the one for my name, my dignity, my home. On the morning of the 3rd day, Melissa emerged with suitcases. Her face was pinched with resentment. Clarice followed, glaring at me like I had stolen something from her. I hope you enjoy this empty house, Melissa muttered. Hope the silence keeps you warm. But I wasn't cold. I was clean. And when the door shut behind them, when their footsteps finally faded from the porch, I stood in the center of the living room and let the silence wrap around me, not like a punishment, but like a balm. I walked to the master bedroom, mine again fully, and sat on the bed where Daniel used to read beside me. I opened the last letter he wrote. It was short. You stayed longer than anyone else would have. You gave more than anyone asked, and you deserved more than they ever gave. I'm sorry, but I fixed it. I gave it back to you. Now, live in it. That was the final key, not just to the house, but to myself. Letting them humiliate me one last time wasn't weakness. It was closure. And now, I was free. The house felt bigger after they left. Not physically, but spiritually. The air seemed lighter, quieter. Still, the silence didn't mean peace right away. Because when you've lived under someone else's shadow for long enough, it takes time to reclaim your own shape. The morning after they packed their last bags, I stood in the kitchen, holding a sponge in one hand and a garbage bag in the other. Dried soda stains dotted the tile. A sticky ring from a wine glass sat stubborn on the counter. Someone had scrawled a childish note on the fridge in Sharpie. Guess you win, old lady. I let out a small breath. Not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. Just the sound of someone who was done pretending this hadn't happened. I started to clean, not because I had to, not because anyone told me to, but because this time I wanted to. The act of scrubbing those floors, of dragging out every stain they left behind, wasn't servitude. It was exorcism. Every dirty plate I washed, every crumpled napkin I tossed, every scuffed footprint I wiped off the tile, I imagined it was a piece of their arrogance I was removing. An insult, a dismissal, a wound. This wasn't about tidiness. This was about reclaiming space. The mop swished over the hardwood, lifting weeks of neglect. I opened the windows. I lit a candle. Lavender. Daniel always hated the smell. I never did. Room by room, I cleaned. And as I cleaned, I remembered. I remembered the time I made a Thanksgiving dinner for 12 on a stove that barely worked. How Clarice had shown up empty-handed, then taken leftovers home like she'd earned them. I remembered Melissa tossing her laundry at me the week after Daniel got sick, saying, "Since you're already home all day." I remembered being told to keep the noise down in my own house, being told that the guest towels were too rough, being told I was too emotional at my own husband's funeral. And I remembered staying silent through all of it, just to keep the peace, just to keep my place. Not anymore. When I reached the hallway, where they'd piled my belongings like donations for goodwill, I paused. The indentations were still on the carpet. I didn't vacuum them away. I wanted to see them just for a little longer. Not out of pain, out of confirmation. Because those marks weren't reminders of being pushed out. They were proof that I had stood firm. By mid-afternoon, I was in the guest bathroom, the one Melissa's daughter had clogged with makeup wipes. I pulled on gloves and got to work. As I scrubbed around the drain, I thought, you will not leave your residue in this house. You will not leave your mess for me to carry. When I stood back and looked at the gleaming sink, I saw myself in the mirror. Not the Eleanor they remembered. Not the one they talked over. Not the maid they made me out to be. This Eleanor had lines on her face, but they were earned, not erased. This Eleanor had silver streaks in her hair, but they shimmered in the sunlight, not with shame. This Eleanor stood taller, even alone, than she ever had when surrounded. Later that evening, I brewed tea and sat by the window, with Daniel's old blanket draped over my shoulders. The scent of lavender still drifted through the air, mingling with the breeze. The house was warm. The quiet was whole. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel used. I felt sacred, because there is a difference between cleaning up after others and cleaning your life of what doesn't belong anymore. They left behind more than trash. They left behind their version of me, the one they could command silence reduce. And now she was gone too, replaced by a woman who owned every floorboard she stood on. I didn't clean their messes anymore. I cleared them out of my life. And that was the cleanest I had felt in years. It was a rainy Thursday when I opened the closet and found the album. Not the digital kind that lived on someone's phone. This was real. Leather-bound, heavy. Tucked behind a blanket I hadn't touched since before Daniel got sick. I hadn't even realized it was missing until my fingers brushed across the worn spine, and I pulled it out with both hands. I carried it to the bed and sat down, slowly brushing dust from the cover. The initials, E.M., were carved into the bottom corner, in Daniel's handwriting, shaky, but still strong. I opened it, and with the first photo time, unraveled. There I was, 23 years old, standing on a balcony in Savannah, barefoot hair, wind-tangled, wearing a sundress Daniel loved. He had taken the photo after surprising me with a weekend trip for our anniversary. I remembered laughing so hard, that day my cheeks ached. The light in my eyes, I almost didn't recognize it. Page after page brought pieces of me back. There we were, building our first porch swing, staining wood with bare hands, and drinking cheap beer. Me with paint in my hair, and Daniel smiling at me like I was the best mistake he'd ever made. There we were, at Clarice's wedding me, in a borrowed dress, holding the bouquet, because her maid of honor had gotten sick. I organized that wedding. Clarice never said thank you, but Daniel had. Whispered it in my ear as we danced. Said, "You're the glue holding this whole family together." I turned the page and found a picture of Melissa when she was 12, resting her head on my lap during a 4th of July picnic. I had made all the food that year. Daniel took the photo while I swatted bugs off the potato salad and told Melissa a story about my own childhood. She had looked at me like I was her whole world, until I wasn't. And that was the ache. Not the betrayal itself, but the rewrite. The way they'd tried to undo my presence, erase the imprint of my care, like I had never been essential. But these photos, they proved otherwise, because no one documents what doesn't matter. As I turned each page, something happened inside me, something subtle but tectonic. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even sadness anymore. It was remembrance of who I used to be before I made myself smaller to fit into their lives, before I handed over my boundaries in exchange for peace, before I allowed their comfort to eclipse my worth. I realized something sitting there, on the bed with that album, open on my lap. I wasn't the maid. I was the witness, the maker, the memory keeper. They wouldn't have had those holidays without me, those birthdays, those summer barbecues, Those hospital visits, those perfectly folded towels and patched knees and reheated casseroles. I built the scaffolding around their lives, and then they had the audacity to pretend I was just background. No more. The turning point wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. It came softly, page by page. It came when I saw my younger self looking back at me and asked, "Where did you go?" And my answer, slow but certain, was I never left. I was just waiting. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened my laptop, I pulled up a blank document, and I started writing a letter, not to them, to me. Dear Eleanor, you are not what they said you were. You are not a burden, not a footnote, not a placeholder. You are the story. You were the root, the shelter, the quiet architect. And now you get to be seen. I printed the letter, folded it, and slipped it inside the photo album. So that next time, I doubt, I'll remember who I was when I started to become who I am. The turning point didn't roar, it whispered, but it was loud enough to drown out their voices. Revenge, when it's real, doesn't start with shouting. It starts with stillness. Not the kind born of fear, but the kind born of clarity. Cold, measured, intentional. After I found the photo album and wrote that letter to myself, something changed. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about reclaiming what had been stolen. Not just my home, not just my dignity, but my narrative, my identity. They thought they had left without consequence. But the truth is, they hadn't left at all. Not really. Melissa still called sometimes, testing the waters with fake concern. Just checking in, Eleanor, she'd chirp. Are you okay, being there all by yourself? Clarice sent a group text about organizing a family weekend at the lake house, my lake house. As if I wouldn't notice that her version of family no longer included me, unless I brought the keys. They thought I'd slink away quietly, but I had something better than rage. I had documentation. While they mocked me behind my back and feigned forgetfulness in front of me, I had saved every voicemail, every rude message, every time they asked for money, and pretended I was too senile to remember. I started organizing it all, not to take them to court. No, that would be too simple, too visible. What I wanted was worse. I wanted them to see themselves in a mirror they couldn't look away from. So I began making preparations. I visited the lake house, a property Daniel had tucked away in Tennessee, deeded quietly to me after Clarice tried to borrow against it during one of her financial spirals. It had sat untouched for years. I had never felt ready to be there alone. But now I unlocked the door like it was mine, because it was. Dust still clung to the floorboards, and the air smelled like pine and forgotten summers. But the bones of the house were strong, just like me. I hired a contractor to renovate it. Nothing flashy, just fresh paint, new flooring, a kitchen makeover. I told him I'd be renting it out to professional women in transition. Widows, divorcees, women like me who had poured themselves into others and been left empty. I wasn't just rebuilding a property. I was laying the foundation for my next chapter. And I didn't stop there. I started meeting with a financial advisor, a younger woman named Callie, who reminded me of myself at 30. Smart, careful, underestimated. When I told her about the bonds Daniel had left me, millions spread across multiple portfolios, she didn't blink. You want to invest with purpose? She asked. I want to build something that outlasts their memory of me, I said. She smiled. Then we'll start now. Meanwhile, I created a new will, tighter than Daniel's had been. I left nothing to Melissa or Clarice. Instead, I named 3 women a neighbor who helped me when Daniel first fell ill, a nurse who sat with me after his final breath, and Callie, my advisor. All women who had seen me, not just used me. But I wasn't done yet. I hired a videographer. "Are you planning a memorial?" he asked. "Not quite," I said. "I'm planning a message." I recorded myself. No makeup, no frills. Just me, sitting at the dining table they once covered in paper plates and condescension. And I told the story of how they treated me, of how I stayed silent, of how I remembered everything. And I ended it with this: "To those who saw me as a maid, I served love, not obligation, and now I serve only myself. To those who saw me as weak, you mistook grace for absence, but I was always watching. And to those who thought they could erase me, I am carved into the walls you tried to inherit. I am the ink in the deeds. I am the one who outlived you." My name is Eleanor Maddox. This is my house, my story, my ending, and I choose who stays in it. I didn't post the video. Not yet. But I sent a copy to my lawyer, and I stored another in the safe Daniel had hidden behind our wedding photo. Let them wonder what I'll do next. Let them stew in the silence. That's the thing about quiet revenge. It doesn't knock on the door. It changes the locks. I knew they would try something. People like Clarice and Melissa don't accept silence as a final answer. They mistake it for a weak one. The only language they understand is possession, and they still believed they had some claim over mine. It was a Friday when I got the first call from a real estate agent. "Hi, this is Janine from Oaken Ridge Realty. I'm just confirming tomorrow's walkthrough at 112 Camellia Drive." I blinked, confused. "Walkthrough?" "Yes, the showing at 10:00 a.m. Your niece Melissa scheduled it earlier this week. You are the owner." "Correct." "Yes," I said slowly, "I am." There was a pause on her end. She didn't mention that. I hung up quietly, my heart thudding, not with fear, but a strange, cool fury. They were trying to sell my house. Without asking, without rights, without shame. It wasn't just audacious, it was delusional. 10 minutes later, I pulled up the listing. There, it was my home, photographed from just the right angles to erase any trace of me. The kitchen looked colder in the photos than it ever had in person. My curtains were gone. My teacups were missing. They had staged it like I'd already died. The listing agent wrote, "Charming family home, great for new beginnings." I laughed out loud, bitter and broken. I could already hear Clarice's voice. "Well, she's old. She won't keep up the place. Better to get ahead of things." But they'd underestimated me. Again, I called Mr. Delaney, explained everything. He didn't even sound surprised. "They don't own a thing," he said, "and they're opening themselves up to a lawsuit if they try to move forward." "Good," I said. "Let's make that clear loudly." He drafted a cease and desist. Sent it that afternoon. Not just to the realtors, but directly to Melissa and Clarice. I didn't hear from either of them for 2 days. Then came the text from Melissa. "I thought you said we could work together." I was trying to help. Help! By erasing me from my own home, by listing the house without so much as a conversation. She hadn't even asked if I wanted to move. She just assumed. Took. Just like always. I typed a reply and then deleted it. She wasn't looking for truth. She was looking for a loophole. But there wasn't one. Daniel had made sure of that. I kept the original email from the realtor screenshots of the listing and the voicemail Melissa had left me a week prior, where she joked, "Maybe we'll finally be able to use the equity from that place soon." Evidence in the past? I'd have thrown it away, let it go, told myself to keep the peace. But peace isn't the absence of noise. It's the presence of justice. And I was finally building it, brick by brick. When the realtor called back to apologize, I invited her to tea. She arrived that Saturday, looking sheepish. I didn't know what was going on. I was told the owner was unavailable. Unavailable, I echoed. Interesting. We sat in the kitchen. I served her Earl Grey in the china Clarice had called too fussy. The agent was young, maybe late 20s. Smart eyes. Tired. I could see in her the same hunger I'd had once to prove myself, to avoid conflict, to get everything done perfectly. So I didn't scold her. I simply handed her a copy of the deed. "Take a photo," I said. "You'll want this on file." She did. Slowly. Carefully. "You're not suing, are you?" she asked, nervous. "No," I said. "But you might tell Melissa and Clarice that I am keeping a record. For everything." She nodded left quietly, and I watched her drive away. That night, I opened the camera footage from the front porch. They'd come by the day after the listing went up. Melissa with a clipboard, Clarice in sunglasses, pointing, planning, laughing, plotting a future that didn't include me. I saved the footage, just in case. They hadn't tried to reach out since the cease and desist. I imagined they were scrambling, now telling themselves I was being unfair or difficult, rewriting their failure as victimhood. But I didn't care, because for once, they were on the outside. Not just physically, but legally, emotionally, spiritually. They had tried to sell what wasn't theirs. They tried to profit from a house they never built, a woman they never respected, and a legacy they never deserved. And all they'd done in the end was sign the receipt for their own exile. Quiet revenge, yes, but not invisible. They saw now. They knew. They couldn't erase me, because I was the ink on every page. I never thought I'd be the one to ask them to come back. Not after what they did. Not after what they tried. But this time, it wasn't out of obligation. It wasn't to beg or to smooth over hurt feelings. It was to reclaim power and deliver truth without apology. I called them one by one. "Melissa, I said I'd like to invite you and Clarice to the house. One final conversation." She hesitated. "Is this about the listing?" "No," I said coolly. "It's about everything." Clarice answered with suspicion. "Why now?" "Because the story you've been telling yourselves is about to be corrected." They agreed to come. I could hear the calculation in their voices. They thought I was offering a truce. They assumed I was weakening, that maybe I'd realized I was lonely. Let them think that. Let them walk through the front door and believe for a few minutes longer that they still had leverage. The meeting was set for Sunday afternoon. The same time Clarice used to host her potlucks here. I baked a pie. Not for them, but for myself. Apple cinnamon from scratch. My own recipe. I set the table with the good china they once refused to use, saying paper plates were easier. I lit a single candle in the center. The house was spotless. I was not trying to impress them. I was showing them what dignity looks like. They arrived, 5 minutes late. Clarice was in heels, Melissa in a stiff blazer she wore like armor. Their eyes scanned the house nervously. "Where is everyone?" Melissa asked. "It's just us," I said. She exchanged a glance with Clarice, whose expression had hardened. "Shall we sit?" I gestured to the table. Clarice scoffed. "So what's the point of all this guilt trip?" "No," I said. "A reckoning." They sat, unwillingly, like guests at a funeral they didn't want to attend. I placed the will in front of them again. "You've both read this before," I said. "But now you're going to listen." Clarice crossed her arms. "We know what it says. Then you know this house, the lake house, the investment accounts, the bonds. Everything belongs to me. Not to you, not to Daniel's children, to me." Silence. Melissa squirmed. "We never contested it. You tried to sell it. I thought you'd moved on. You hoped I had. You wanted me out so badly, you risked fraud. You scheduled a home showing for a house that wasn't yours, told a realtor I was unavailable, and then acted shocked when I reminded you what ownership looks like." Clarice started to speak, but I raised my hand. "I'm not here to argue. I'm here to close the book." I pulled out the envelope I had prepared, placing it next to the will. "This is my new will. You are not in it." Melissa's mouth opened in protest, but I continued. "You will receive nothing. Not when I pass. Not when this house is eventually sold. Not a dollar. Not a dish. Not a memory. Eleanor, you don't have to do this, Melissa said, voice suddenly soft. We're family. No, I replied. You're a woman who called me a burden, who told her friends I was squatting in her father's home, who let her children speak to me like I was beneath them. You are not my family. You are my lesson. Clarice stood. You're being cruel. No, I said, rising too. You were cruel. I was patient. I walked to the corner cabinet and retrieved a small wooden box. Inside were the letters Daniel wrote me, the ones he left hidden behind the legal documents. I placed them on the table. He saw you, I said. He saw what you were. And he left everything to me, not out of spite, but out of justice. Melissa's eyes welled up. He loved you, she said quietly. Yes, I answered. He did. And for years, I let that love blind me to how you treated me. But I see clearly now. In this meeting, it's not to shame you. It's to release you. After today, you are no longer welcome in this house. Clarice scoffed. You think you'll die happy in an empty house. I smiled. This house isn't empty. It's full of truth now. And that's more than it's had in years. They sat there for a moment, two women who had built their lives on assumption, entitlement, and convenience, realizing they were finally, irrevocably outside. You have 10 minutes to say goodbye to this house, I said, walking toward the door. After that, you leave, and you don't come back. Clarice muttered something under her breath. Melissa said nothing. When I returned 10 minutes later, they were gone. The candle was still burning, the pie untouched. I poured myself a cup of tea, took a bite of the slice I served myself, and looked around. The house felt whole again, because the final lie had been spoken, and I was the only one left telling the truth. They didn't beg right away. Pride is a stubborn thing. It doesn't melt in a single day. It cracks quietly, reluctantly, under the weight of reality. And after that final meeting, I could feel the silence beginning to crack. At first, it was a slow drip, a voicemail from Melissa. I wanted to say I didn't realize how much Dad had protected you. Or us, I guess. I didn't mean for it to go that far. Call me back. I didn't. The next day, an email from Clarice with the subject line, You were always stronger than I thought. I didn't open it. I'd spent decades hoping for their kindness, twisting myself into someone quiet, enough useful enough, invisible enough to earn it. But I had learned something in that quiet. The more you tolerate the disrespect, the more they believe it's love. Now that I had withdrawn my tolerance, they mistook it for cruelty. They wanted forgiveness without change. They wanted comfort without cost. And I had nothing left to give them. Still, the messages kept coming, more desperate, less composed. Melissa showed up a week later, uninvited. I saw her standing at the bottom of the porch steps, like a child who had broken something she couldn't fix. Eleanor, she called gently. Please. I opened the door but didn't step outside. I just want to talk, she said. Not about the will, not about the house, just us. There is no us, Melissa. She swallowed hard. I made mistakes. You made decisions, I said. You chose who I was in your life. And you don't get to rewrite that now that it's inconvenient. Her eyes filled with tears. I was scared, she whispered. After Dad died, I didn't know what would happen. I thought maybe if I controlled the house, the finances, I could keep everything stable. And you tried to control me, I added. You told your children I was in the way. You let them mock me. You planned to take everything from me without even the decency of a conversation. I know, her voice cracked. I know. I was awful. I was cruel. But please don't cut me out forever. I stepped forward down one stair. Melissa, I said gently, but firmly, I don't hate you. But I no longer belong to the version of me who begged for a seat at your table. I built this table, and I choose who sits at it now." Tears ran freely down her cheeks. "Can I at least visit sometimes?" I looked past her at the yard. I had replanted the windows. I'd scrubbed, cleaned the path I had fought to walk freely again. "I'll think about it," I said. "But you won't guilt your way back in. If there's a path, you'll have to build it. Slowly. With action. Not words." She nodded, defeated. She left without another word. The next day, Clarice dropped off a letter. It was handwritten. Apologetic. Too late. She wrote about how she resented the way Daniel chose me again and again. How she had never really believed I belonged in the family. How she thought the house would eventually come to her by default, because that's how things are supposed to go. She said she was sorry, that she didn't realize how deeply she had wounded me, that she missed the holidays we used to have when I cooked, cleaned, and smiled quietly from the kitchen. That line nearly made me tear the letter in two, but I didn't, because it confirmed what I needed to know. They missed the version of me who made their lives easier, not the woman I had become. That's not regret. That's nostalgia for control. I didn't write back. I didn't need to. The silence said more than 1,000 explanations ever could. It told them their access to me was a privilege, not a birthright. It told them that I would no longer clean up emotional messes they made with careless words and convenient forgetfulness. It told them they had to live with the sound of their own absence in my life. And it told me that I had finally made peace with mine. It's strange how quiet a house can be after the storms pass, not silent in a hollow way, but still, like the air has finally settled into its rightful shape. That was how it felt waking up alone in the home they all tried to claim. There were no more voices echoing down the hallways, no slamming cabinet doors, no passive-aggressive notes on the fridge, just the hum of the heater and the steady rhythm of my own breath. But more than the house, it was me that felt different, because for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid to be seen. Not as Daniel's wife, not as the maid they made me out to be. I was Eleanor Maddox, and I was taking my name back. I began with the bedroom, the same room Clarice once tried to evict me from, like a hotel guest. I repainted the walls, a shade of soft sage, peaceful, confident. I replaced the bedding, the curtains, the rug, not because I needed a change, but because I needed a space that felt like mine, not just a relic of what I'd lost. I even changed the locks on the doors, not out of fear, out of finality. They weren't coming back, not in, not around, not through me. I visited the courthouse the next week, not for any dramatic gesture, just to update my legal documents. My ID still said Eleanor Maddox dependent. The term felt laughable now. No dependents, I told the clerk. No second party. Just me. It felt like nothing in the moment. Just a pen. Just a box. Checked. But on the inside, it thundered. I began volunteering at the local women's center on Wednesdays. Quiet work, organizing clothes, helping with intake. No one there knew what I had been through. No one asked. But every time I met a woman whose voice trembled when she said her name, I saw pieces of myself. One afternoon, a young woman asked, "Are you always this calm?" I smiled. "No," I said, "but I earned this calm. I bled for it, and that was the truth." Reclaiming my name didn't mean shouting it from rooftops. It meant wearing it fully, without shrinking. I started signing my letters again. Not E. Maddox like I used to, when I was trying to sound formal or polite. I wrote it out in full, with intention. Eleanor Maddox. I told people at the bookstore, at the market, at the post office. Just Eleanor, thank you. No one blinked. No one hesitated, because I no longer did. I even ordered new checks, and when they arrived, I cried right there at the kitchen counter. Not because of the ink, not because of the paper, because for the first time, the name at the top didn't feel borrowed. It felt earned. Reclaiming your name isn't about divorcing your past. It's about finally recognizing that you were always the author, even when others tried to steal your pen. One evening, I sat on the porch watching the light soften across the lawn, and I whispered my name aloud. Not out of habit, but out of joy. Eleanor Maddox, I said to the wind. Owner, survivor, witness, builder, heir. It was a long journey to say it with pride, but I had arrived, and no one would rewrite me again. I no longer wake up dreading the silence. Now, I wake up to it like an old friend, one that holds space for me, instead of suffocating me. The house doesn't feel haunted anymore. Not by their words, not by what they tried to take, not even by Daniel's absence, because I finally stopped living in the life they scripted for me, and I started writing my own. Rewriting a life doesn't require fanfare. It starts with small, deliberate acts. Making coffee in a mug I bought for myself. Sitting in Daniel's old chair without grief heavy on my shoulders. Hanging artwork on the walls that reflect my taste, not the inherited preferences of others. It meant spending a weekend by the lake house, my lake house, and deciding to open it up as a retreat for women like me, women who gave, who were forgotten, and who now needed time and air to remember who they were. We call it the second light. Just 3 bedrooms, a wide porch, and a rule that no one does dishes unless they feel like it. The first woman who arrived, Sharon, was 62, recently widowed. Her son had moved in, then slowly pushed her out. She had nowhere to go. She wept on my shoulder the first night and whispered, I thought I was worthless. I held her hands and said, No, you're just unclaimed. Let's change that. We cooked together, talked about love, about betrayal, about how pain doesn't disqualify you from peace, it prepares you for it. Another woman, Gloria said, You don't seem like someone who's been hurt. I smiled. I've just stopped letting the people who hurt me decide what kind of woman I am. They always ask what made me start the retreat. I tell them I was treated like a maid in my own home. Then I realized I was the one holding the keys. That's the truth. The same home they once tried to sell out from under me. It's mine, through and through. Every creak in the floorboard, every mark on the kitchen tile, every flower in the yard. I see them now, not as scars, but as symbols. I lived through something, and I came out named whole and seen. I've updated my will again. Everything now goes to the Second Light Foundation. No Melissa, no Clarice, no cousins waiting in the wings with fake affection and open palms. The house will become a permanent space for women who've been silenced, erased, discarded. A haven for those who served love quietly and are finally ready to be served truthfully in return. One afternoon, I got a letter in the mail. No return address, just a small envelope with shaking handwriting. Inside, a single sentence from Melissa. I hope one day I become half the woman you are. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I folded the note neatly and tucked it in the photo album beside Daniel's final letter. Maybe she will become that woman, but her journey will not pass through my door. I don't hold anger anymore, only boundaries, and those too are written on my terms. Sometimes I sit in the garden Daniel and I once tended together. I still talk to him. Can you believe how far I've come? I whisper. They thought I was just a footnote in your story. Turns out I was the author of my own all along. The wind rustles the leaves, and I smile. I don't need applause. I don't need revenge. I only needed the truth and the strength to live by it. My name is Eleanor Maddox. I was treated like a maid after my husband died. But I was the real heir, and now I live in a life I built with my own hands, on my own terms. and no one will ever erase me again.